What's up, guys? Welcome to another day of misery for the Toronto Maple Leafs. As you can see in this video, this is what all of Toronto are feeling like, especially Mitch Marner, who has undoubtedly played his last game for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And, using the past tense in your interview to describe how you feel being a Toronto Maple Leaf, wearing the jersey, playing for them. Um, yeah, he's gone, in my opinion. He's a UFA, and the Toronto Maple Leafs get manhandled in Game 7 by the Florida Panthers. Um, the Stanley Cup champions of last season, are headed back to the Eastern Conference Final versus the Carolina Hurricanes. Change needs to come out of Toronto. John Tavares needs to go. He's a UFA. Mitch Marner needs to go. He's a UFA. Wouldn't it surprise me if a team really strikes um, the Toronto Maple Leafs in the heart after this loss and tries to offer sheet Nyes, who is an RFA. We've seen St. Louis offer sheet Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, and that was a major home run. And now I think a lot of teams are going to use that moving forward to target young top players that have untapped potential. And yeah, Toronto's going to have a very difficult offseason, probably the hardest offseason they've had in a very long time. The core four is officially over. That era is done. They haven't even gone to the Eastern Conference Final with their core four, which is pathetic. Teams um, that have worse players on their lineup in the past that we've seen, like the Montreal Canadiens, make it to the Stanley Cup Final, and they didn't even have a core four. They had, a team of young players mixed with vets, and obviously having a guy like Carey Price help. But to see that other teams that do not have as much successful regular season players on their team as the Toronto Maple Leafs and not translate that success into the postseason is honestly sad and pathetic. And year in and year out, the same result every single time. Toronto finds a way to get eliminated in the first round, and more recently in the second round. They've made it past the first round twice these last couple years, but always find a way to lose. Brad Marchand being the Toronto Maple Leafs killer once again, this time wearing a Florida Panthers jersey, had the most points out of both teams. The series was no undoubtedly the MVP this series, scoring the overtime winner in game 3, which changed everything. Toronto was leading the series 2-0. Florida wins 3 in a row. Then after Toronto ties it 3-3 with a shutout win 2-0, and then they get dismantled in game 7. So as you can take a look here and do or die games in the Matthews era, they've lost every single game from 2018 to 2025. Um, Taking a look at Florida, the biggest surprise in their playoff run right now is Etu Lustarainen, who is up there in points in the postseason, playing third line minutes. Fantastic. Um, yeah, people are saying that Brandon Shanahan should be removed from the organization. He spent 11 years there, had 3 different GMs. Unacceptable. And the last thing I'll say before I give the mic over to Luca is that captain Austin Matthews said that the reason why they've lost was because they had too many passengers. Yet did not take any blame for being one of those passengers and being one of the worst players in these playoffs versus the Florida Panthers. So you have to really take a hard look at yourselves, Toronto Maple Leafs, and just say, I know I'm a great player in the regular season, but I'm not getting it done in the postseason. And the results show. There's so many embarrassing stats that are honestly baffling. And you can have Steve Dangle, all these guys cover the Toronto Maple Leafs, but we're gonna say it here on our end too. But this is the biggest embarrassment of an NHL team I've seen in the last 25 years. This is a team that hasn't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. This is a team that had all the winning pieces, got a better GM, got a hard nosed coach, improved their defense, had one of the best goaltending duos this season, finished first in the Atlantic. They did everything right, and they still end up in the same hole that they end up in every single year. Enough said on my part.
You know what's funny? It feels like I'm rewatching a video in repeat because it's every year that we talk about the same thing over and over again. Look, I just want to give credit to the Florida Panthers because you know this is a team that won the Stanley Cup last year, right? They come into this season. I don't think they necessarily played particularly well down the end of the stretch of the season to where everyone was like, "Ooh, they can do it again." I know they made some really good offseason acquisitions, Brad Marchand, obviously Seth Jones, right? And people didn't really know where they were going to go and how good they were going to be. Obviously, they're the favorites, so no matter what, like you can't doubt them. But they were going into a series against Tampa where there was a little bit of uncertainty as to how they were going to be able to do it and if they were going to be able to do it. Aaron Ekblad was going to miss the first two games of the series. That was going to cost them a bit. Kachuk, there was uncertainty there. Anyway, the point is that, they come in, they beat Tampa in 5, in which I was pretty surprised about. I thought Tampa was going to give them a better run for their money. They didn't. And then, they come into the series against Toronto and they go down 2-0 in the first two games of the series. And it's a little bit of like, okay, like maybe this is not the year for Florida, right? Maybe it's one of those things that they're on a Stanley Cup slump. They won the cup last year, and now it's the year after, and they're probably going to slump and fall out of the second round. And then where the series changes, Brad Marchand's overtime winner in Game 3, and that to me is the turning point of this series, right? Toronto was going into this game. They were up 3-1 in Game 3. Below that game, goes to overtime, and it's a lucky bounce that hops into the net that Brad Marchand scores, and that seems to be the deciding factor in that series, right? And then you look at Game 4, they shut out the Leafs, or sorry, they win that game, and then Game 5, obviously, you know, look at the team. They go up 3-2 in the series in what was a really interesting situation for Florida, where they shut down Game 4, and then Game 5 give Toronto that thumping of 6-1. And that's where you're like, okay, what happened? Because in Game 3 we were talking about how potentially Toronto was going to win that game and likely beat them in 5 or beat them in 4, and it's like, okay, whatever. And then Marchand scores, you get shut out in Game 4, and then you go and make that performance in game number 5, Toronto. And Florida goes to your own barn, makes you look like a bunch of losers pretty much, and wins 3 straight. And now they're going back home for Game 6. Toronto finds a way to win in a pretty good game. I thought they were solid in Game 6. I thought Toronto was the better team. I thought Toronto gave Florida a hard time. And I was like, damn, Game 6, Toronto bounced back after 3 not so great games. Maybe there's something there. Game 7, same thing as Game 5. And to me, that's where I'm going to give Florida a lot of credit, because if you look at the Florida Panthers from Game 4 on, they have let in a grand total of 4 goals since Game 4. That to me is very, very impressive, because to go into a situation where they're down 2-1 in the series, to shut out the Leafs in Game 4, go back to Toronto, win that game, then lose Game 6, even though they only technically let in 2 goals, right? They still lost that game, and then they go and beat Toronto in Game 7 the way they did. Like, to me, that was really impressive to me. And I think that we have to look at Florida as a true cup contender and a true
Well, the defending champs, right? Everyone
a
counted
true
them
cup
out
contender.
in the first round.
I'm saying a true cup contender in the sense where they can do it back to back.
They
And
can.
there's no way, I don't know if there's a team that's going to stop them. And I know they're coming up against Carolina, who, let's get to them as well. Fantastic series against the Capitals. They outmatched them from Game 1 all the way to Game 5. It wasn't particularly close either.
No, at all.
I don't like. I have nothing negative to say about the Carolina Hurricanes. Like, Game 1, they were really good. Game 3, Game 4, Game 5, they were really good. Game 2, they kind of struggled a little bit, but it was normal. Like, you're not going to expect it to shut out. You're not expected to sweep the team anyway. But they look fantastic. Like, I know if you compare the matchups between Florida and Carolina, yeah, you can argue Florida's had the harder matchups, but Carolina's handled their business really, really well. And they won in five against New Jersey, they won in five against Washington, and Florida's going to be their toughest test by far,
Yeah.
right? But they've had a lot of time to rest. They've had a lot of time to be able to close out series in early fashions and be able to get rest, which helps for healing the players or whatever. And if you look at their lineup, like I said, it's not the most elite lineup. Like if you look at their forward core, apart from the top line, like there's some good pieces,
Yeah.
but there's not a wow in the top. They have a lot of really good like the lines are well balanced in the sense where, you know, they have guys that are producing at a really good rate, but they play a team game, and that's the type of game that Rod Brindamore likes to play. But their decor is one of the best in the league, if not
Yeah.
the best in the league. And Freddie Anderson's been fantastic. So I think this is going to be a really fun series. I think Florida is going into a situation where they're playing a different team. Obviously, these teams met in 2023, but I'm saying they're going into a situation where things are different, right? Carolina, I think, is at a point where they're trying to prove that they're not. I wouldn't say frauds, but that they can get over the hump of going to the Stanley Cup Final. And they're coming up against a Florida team who just went through a 7-game battle with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And now they have to play tomorrow because we're recording this on a Monday. So Tuesday is when they're expected to play. So it's not a quick turnaround time for Florida. And they got to travel. After going from Toronto, they got to travel to Carolina. So this
Yeah.
could be a really interesting situation for both teams. I like the matchup. I think it's going to be a fun matchup. I
I'm
think on
excited too.
paper, I think on paper, offensively, Florida is much better than Carolina. Defensively, I would give it to Carolina. And goaltending, right now, I know Bobrovsky has played really, really well, but I would still slightly edge it to Freddie Anderson. I think Freddie Anderson, when healthy, is a really good goaltender. Although it's up for debate between the goaltending. But offensively, Florida's a juggernaut. Defensively, I would give it to Carolina. And in net, like I said, it's 50-50 depending on who you ask.
Well, yeah, Freddie Anderson is
It's going to
currently
come down to team.
yeah,
Yeah.
Freddie Anderson is currently the best goalie left right now. I mean, he's been showing it since round one that he's
Right.
been phenomenal in these playoffs. Even when he went down injury and Kochetkov came back, he found a way to come back, which is great news because that could have been a turning point
Right.
for the Carolina Hurricanes. Like I said in the first round, Carolina has the easiest path, quote unquote, to go to the Eastern Conference Finals, but they didn't
Just in terms
do
of
it.
matchups, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but they didn't do it in a way where like, wow, like the other teams are giving them a hard time.
No,
They
they
just
closed them out
went
easy.
in and they just cleaned them up and said, "Okay, we're ready. Next." It's as if like this is just like an appetizer for them, leading up to the main course, which is the Florida Panthers. This is a team that always has a deep run, either to a second round or a third round matchup, and they always find a way to get eliminated. So, like you were saying, they have to make it to the finals, and what better way to get revenge versus a team that swept you 2 years ago? And mind you, that was a very close series. If I'm mistaken, it was always a 1 goal difference every single game.
Yeah.
That's how close it was. We're that close from seeing a Carolina Stanley Cup Final matchup as opposed to Florida, but Florida edged them out. These are two of the top 10 best coaches right now in the playoffs. This is the best defensive team all around that's going to the Eastern Conference Final versus a team that pretty much has everything. The Washington Capitals was a team that overachieved. And I said it after the first
Yeah.
round in the second round matchup. And I said, John Carlson is not having a good playoffs. A lot of people crapped on me for that. And what happened? It
Played
continued
worse.
it continued in the second round, and it got worse. So I'm not saying I expect an apology, guys, but come on. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, I said he was a passenger. He had to step up the way that he did during the regular season. He was a ghost. Carolina literally shut them down completely. I
Mhm.
think Washington's best player was the guy who returned from injury, Alexei Protas. And that's saying a lot. And it's just embarrassing that the Washington Capitals couldn't score more than 1 goal in 3 out of their 5 games versus the Carolina Hurricanes. That could be said, or we could also say that Carolina is very good defensively and just shut them out completely and gave no breathing room to the Washington Capitals. either statement is true, right? So, anyways, so for this matchup for the Carolina Hurricanes, what I like about this is that Logan Stankoven has something to prove here. He's a guy that was acquired at the trade deadline involving the Nico Rantanen blockbuster, and he's been fantastic playing in a top six role. He's been very good in these playoffs, and so has Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall was basically a cap dump for Chicago, and he's really fit in well where he's gotten a contract extension with the Carolina Hurricanes, and I think they finally have a good, solid second line that's composed of Hall, Roslovich, who came back from injury, and Stankoven. And their third line, such an underrated line in the NHL. Martinuk, Stahl, and Carrier, known to be a shutdown line, but they're able to produce offensively as well. And their fourth line, Kokeniemi, Robertson, and Blake. Jackson Blake's been great too. There's a reason why they put him on the top power play unit. They have a lot of Swiss Army knives on this team, and the guy that I want to talk about the most, I know we always give Seth Jarvis his flowers, and he's been their best player overall in these playoffs. But Svechnikov,
Yeah,
the
what a turnaround.
consistency, man, in his game during these playoffs is what is so important and key to their success and why they made it so far and why they've been winning in 5 games in both the first and second round matchups. This kid is finally turning on the Jets when it matters the most. And
They need him. They needed him to. So
exactly, because if without Svechnikov, this is a pretty depleted offensive team if you really look at it. And they're even getting offense on their back end too. Like I know Orlov is currently injured, but he's been putting up points too. Jacob Slavin's has been having a good offensive playoff run as well. But just how good he is defensively, I missed shocked how people are just only noticing how good he is as a defenseman after the Four Nations. This is a guy that's always been doing this all the time. He deserves a lot of credit. He's fantastic. Shane Gostisbehere on the power play is great. Sean Walker is doing a great job too offensively. They just added Alexander Nikishin, um, who came in for Jalen Chatfield, who's currently injured, and even Brett Burns. Man, he had a good playoff performance versus the Washington Capitals. That was like low-key, like prime time Brent Burns that was showcased in
yeah,
that matchup. So, Carolina's riding it a hot wave right now. They're riding the wave essentially. They're very hot. This is probably the most underrated team that's left right now. So quote unquote the underdogs. And the Florida Panthers are the defending champs. They're getting production from everybody. And the fact that Brad Marshall, the guy that they got at the deadline, is their best forward is fantastic. And I do believe that they have the best third line currently. Brad Marchand, Etu Lusterainen, and Anton Lundell. That's a fantastic line. And
I
it was, yeah.
I agree, and I want to add something to Florida because it's it's crazy because if you look at it, it's like you said, right? Their third line is fantastic, but like it's not like their top guys are not producing either. Sam Reinhart has 11 points in 12 games. I know it's not elite numbers, but they're still decent numbers. Barkov has 10 points in 12 games. Sam Bennett 6 goals, 9 points. Right, I'm not a huge fan of him, but we'll cross that bridge on July 1st when he's a free agent if he's still there. Kachuk, who hasn't been at his best, still has 9 points in 12 games. Carter Verhage, 8 points in 12 games. Nate Schmidt's been a real revelation for them on the back end, 7 points in 12 games for him. And then you have Aaron Ekblad, who's producing when he's in the lineup. Seth Jones, 6 points as well. But they're getting production from everybody. And you look at the goals that came into the series, right? Like you look at the top guys, but Jonah Gadjevich had a goal in this series, right? Jesper Bachvist had a goal in this series, right? So it's impressive to see that their young guys and their fourth line guys as well are producing. And then Sergei Bobrovsky, I mean, it wasn't the prettiest series for him. I don't think his numbers were necessarily at his best, but again, you look at what he did over the last 4 games and how he was able to shut down the Leafs and not let in a lot of goals. Right, he played well down the stretch, the last 4 games at least, and so he gave Florida a chance to win. And Florida, made his job easier in the sense where they scored a lot of goals, so he didn't really have to be at his best, but he was. And so I think that for Florida this round against Carolina, it's going to be a lot harder for them to score goals, right? And that's I think the biggest difference between Carolina and Toronto is Carolina's very good defensively, right? They, like we mentioned, they're the best defensive team in the league. And, with how good Freddie Anderson has been, it might be a really tough series for Florida to be able to hold on. And I think this is what's going to determine this series. It's going to be special teams, obviously, because in every playoff series, it's special teams and it's always goaltending. We always talk about those two things being the number one factors. But one thing that I want to bring up is if Florida plays tight games, which I know they've shown that they can do, I think it might benefit Carolina more, right? I think if Carolina could push this to, overtime a couple of times, I think that could be a benefit to Carolina. Whereas if Florida gets off to a good start and they score, let's say, 2 or 3 goals on the bounce, it might be tougher. And the reason I say that is just from an offensive standpoint, like I mentioned before, Carolina doesn't have what Florida has in terms of offense. And so in order for Carolina to win this series, they're going to have to shut down Florida. And it's going to be a tough task for them too, right? Like Florida, like we mentioned, has 4 lines that are really, really good that can score at any time. So this is not going to be an easy series for either team. And I don't think anyone expects it to be. But in terms of where the matchup is at, like if Carolina can keep it tight and if Carolina can keep it on a 1 goal, 2 goal game, whether they're leading or not, I think there's a better chance for them in this series. But if it comes down to Florida just being able to walk in and kind of score at will, this series is going to be early for them. So I don't know. And obviously the question mark is always Freddie Anderson for Carolina, because although he's been at his best, when it comes down to it and when he comes up to a really good team like Florida, is he going to be able to continue that sustained pressure that Florida gives them? I don't know. But then again, he's also had a lot of rest. And so when Freddie Anderson is healthy and he's got a lot of rest, he's pretty
Yeah.
good. So,
Yeah.
you got to give him credit and the Carolina Hurricanes credit. I don't know how to call this series. Like for me, I think it's hard to bet against Florida. I really do, because I myself personally, I bet against them against Tampa and they won. I bet against them against the Leafs because I said Leafs in 7 and they won. It's hard for me to bet against them in this series. And it's not because I don't believe in Carolina. I think regardless, honestly, I think both these teams can win the Stanley Cup. I think both these teams are deserving of winning a Stanley Cup. But in my opinion, I just think based off roster, I think Carolina's just a little bit. I don't think they're as good as Florida in terms of roster on paper, but defense does win championships, and they've
Yeah.
shown that they're capable of being a good defensive team. So if they can do that against Florida, then yeah, I think their chances that I think they're probably favorites to win a Stanley Cup, and we haven't even gotten to Edmonton and Dallas yet. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I'm gonna give this to Florida in 7, just because the experience of being able to win a cup last year, and just I think they're just a better roster overall, and I think they're just too good offensively, where it's hard for me to give it to Carolina. But and again, this is not a slate of Carolina fans. I honestly think you guys are gonna push Carolina to 7, and it would not surprise me in the slightest if Carolina wins, because they're at that point now where they have to get over the hump, right? We've talked about how they can't get to the Eastern Conference Final, and when they get to the Eastern Conference Final, they can't win. This is their chance to prove everybody wrong. And I think that if there's one team that can do it, it's Carolina. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm at, but I'll say Florida in 7 for
Yeah.
the series.
Yeah. Just like you reiterated what I was saying before, is that this is the most underrated team that's
Yeah,
left, the biggest
yeah,
underdogs. They don't have flashy names up front, right? But they're still getting the job done.
right.
Whether you say that their opponents were, you know, the weaker path to get to the Eastern Conference Final, as opposed to what Florida had to endure in Tampa Bay and Toronto, or or Edmonton had to face in terms of Vegas and LA, or Dallas in Colorado and Winnipeg. Um, they managed to find a way to get here, and
But also the other thing too is we can say that, but you can only play the teams that are in front of you. So the
yeah,
argument to that is like, yes, it's an easy path in the sense where the Metro wasn't very good, but they beat them and they beat them comfortably. So it's
yeah,
like you can't turn around, like, it's like you said before at the beginning of the video, where you're like, it's not that they went to 7 games against Washington and New Jersey and it was like, oh boy, like they cut it close.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they
yeah. That's what I was saying.
absolutely they mopped the floor with them. So it's
Yeah,
like it's yes, you can look at the path not being easier, but at the same time, the opponents they played, they beat.
I
So
want to
now
give
it's
them.
about
I want to
being
give
able,
them credit though, because they
yeah,
currently have the second best power play right now. That out of the teams that are still in it,
right,
they have best goaltender right now according to goals against, in terms of also their penalty kill. They're the best.
Montreal second
Um,
in power play percentage is funny.
yeah, and so they've been nearly perfect in terms of their special teams, in terms on their 5v5 play. So like we have to credit them on that. But then again, like you were saying, Florida, everything that they've endured, right? Like they've beat Tampa Bay comfortably. They when they were down 2-0, they came back and beat the Toronto Maple Leafs that looked like they had a stranglehold over the Florida Panthers. And also the thing with Carolina that is going to be the X factor here is that do they have the guys that are going to step up to produce in all four lines, just like Florida Panthers have, right? You mentioned Kachuk. He's not having the best series because he's obviously not 100%.
Right.
He's dealing with a lot of injuries and he just came back for the playoffs. But you guys have Marsha, Luosterainen, Reinhardt, Lundell, Barkov, Bennett, Verhage, and now your defense is chipping in, and Schmidt, Jones, Ekblad, Kulikov. Where's your weakness offensively?
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
getting offense everywhere. When one line is not producing, the other line is, right? And another point that I want to make is that Paul Maurice, what he showed that he could outcoach Craig Berube by making one important change where he didn't even hesitate. He completely flipped the fourth line after the first two games. He got rid of three players and brought in three other players, and those three players were difference makers. Gadovic, right? Was one of them. He brought in Nosek, and the third guy that he had in was it Bachfist?
I think it was well. Bokvist was a big player in that series
Yeah,
against Toronto.
and Bachfist as well, right? And Nico Sturm was taken out of the lineup, right?
Yeah,
Balinskins. Oh my god, I can't pronounce his name. I'm so sorry.
Ubas Balinskis.
Yes. So he was removed out of the lineup as well.
Yeah, because he
Uh,
was only in because Ekblad was suspended and
yeah,
then hurt.
yeah, and then you had Samoskevich as well that was removed out of the lineup, and he had a good second half of the season when Matthew Tkachuk was out with injury and they were
Their
dealing with
team
other
is
injuries.
crazy.
He was doing really well, but these guys have so much depth that they could slot in and out players and they're going to still get production from these guys. Like they
Right.
come into the lineup wanting to prove a point,
Mhm.
wanting to prove that they deserve to be
Right.
part of the starting lineup. I said that Toronto had a better um core offensively in terms of their four lines, right? All four lines, and that Florida had a good top nine, but they had a very weak fourth line. Well, my opinion was partly right according to the first two
But
games,
it's
but I
crazy.
got proven wrong after
Yeah.
because the guys that were brought in on that fourth line were better than what Toronto had on their third line.
Yeah.
And it's not normal that Toronto's two best players are Max Domi and Max Pacioretty, and their core four was not there. They were invisible, right?
Not
And
surprising in the
and not
playoffs.
only that, but like Brad Marchand, apart from Mikko Rantanen, has now become the tied for the best trade acquisition at the deadline. And I know Toronto gave up a second round pick, but the conditions was that he had to play more than 50% in the playoffs, and they had to pass the first and second round, which they have, meaning that the second round pick now turns into a 2027 first round pick
Which
in
goes to
this trade.
Boston. Yeah.
So that's great in terms of what Boston gets in trade value out of Marshall, and what Florida gets out of Marchand. He was the MVP in this round. He's the reason why Toronto lost, and he's a leaf killer. And I look at what Toronto did. They traded a first round pick for Scott Laughton. What did Scott Laughton do apart from Game 7, where he was probably their best forward? Stats wise, he didn't really do anything, right? Then you have Brandon Carlo. Don't even get me started on that guy. A first round pick and Fraser Mitten for him. Wow, this team does not fail to embarrass themselves when it comes to every single trade deadline.
But you know what? Like, I'm gonna say one thing about that. We can talk about the trade deadline acquisitions, and yeah, they weren't great in terms of what they got from a production standpoint. But let's just call it. Let's call a spade a spade. Like Austin Matthews, William Nylander, Mitch Marner, John Tavares weren't good enough. That's why they lost the series. Like the rest of it, honestly, I don't like this whole thing about like, oh, they traded a first round pick for Carlo and they traded a first round pick for Lawton. Like, honestly, that shouldn't even be an issue. Like, whatever. Tree Living tried something, and honestly, at the time they were great acquisitions. Like, if Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, and John Tavares actually do something in the playoffs, they're in the third round. So like, let's not sugarcoat this. Like the reason they lost the series is because the top guys weren't the top guys, and that's the same fucking story for 8 years. Pardon
Yeah,
my language. Like it's
it's frustrating.
like you can't you can justify as many. You can blame Brad Treliving for whatever you want. You can blame Craig Ruby for whatever you want. At the end of the day, it's the same exact scenario 8 years in a row with the same group of guys. That's it.
Well, I mean, I think they got the right GM. I think they got the right coach. I think,
They don't have the right players.
and they got the right goalies this time. I think it's the offense the problem. It comes from the core four. So, also I would like to say, in terms of my prediction, because I have yet to give it, I think Florida wins at seven.
Yeah.
Championship pedigree is key here. The
Mhm.
opponents that they faced, they're coming in hot. They just beat two of the best teams in the East right now. A lot of people doubted Florida. We doubted Florida in the first round. With all their injuries, how the regular season was playing out, but they've shown to be, just like the Carolina Hurricanes have shown to be, true playoff performers. When it matters most, this is when they come to play. And offensively, hands down, it goes to Florida. In terms of their back end and in terms of their forward core, they could get production from anybody. Bob has shown to be Bobrovsky that we know and love for the last 3 years and actually be worth his contract. In the later half of the Toronto series, where he really dominated, um, in terms of how many goals he was letting in. He was fantastic in the second half. At the
Yeah.
beginning, he was very shaky. That was old Bob that we were seeing. But Stanley Cup champion Bob, playoff Bob, we saw him in the second half. So if he could continue the way he's playing right now, heading into this Carolina series, it's going to be an even matchup goaltending wise.
Yeah.
Freddie Anderson, I have no doubt in my mind, is going to continue to be fantastic. He's proven it in 2 rounds consecutively that he's the best playoff goalie right now as it stands. So I'm not doubting him. So well, I think it's even as of right now. And in terms of their defensive structure, Carolina is known for this. It goes to the Carolina Hurricanes. They're so deep defensively in terms of what they're able to do in terms of their forward core and in terms of their defense. This is a team that has scored so many shorthanded goals, like I've said in previous videos. We've seen it in the regular season, right? We've seen it in the playoffs. This is a team that has great special teams, their power play and their penalty kill. And I know their biggest concern was their power play heading into the playoffs because it was very inconsistent in the regular season, but that's been one of their most consistent things right now is their power play. And it's actually Florida's power play that hasn't been that great that they need to get things going. And from what I've seen in the second round, their second power play unit of Marchand, Bennett, Ekblad, Schmidt, and Lundell was better than their first unit.
Yeah.
So
That's the good thing about having two good power play units, though.
exactly right. I think maybe it's a little bit of an overkill to say this, but I think on any other team, or at least in certain teams, this second power play unit could be a first line power play unit.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, I think, yeah, special teams is definitely going to play a role, but Carolina's PK is also really good. So it's going to be
Yeah,
interesting to see. I mean, I think at the end of the day, Florida plays really good 5-on-5. Obviously their power play does need to be better, but I think at the end of the day, like this team can score goals in bunches, and that's been
yeah,
like something that's really impressed me is just how they can do it. Like they can just find ways to score goals. But yeah, I think Florida's going to win in seven. I think it's gonna be a fun series. I'm actually looking forward to watching those games because not to take anything away from Carolina fans in general, but the New Jersey and Washington series weren't exactly the most entertaining,
no,
if I would say
you
so.
can't
That's
blame
not a
Carolina for
slate.
that.
That's
You
not a
have to,
slate at Carolina, by the way. I'm just trying to say, like, I
if
don't think
anything, that's a slate towards Washington and New Jersey, just being
right.
honestly pathetic and horrible.
I think against Florida you're going to see a more exciting series because Florida makes it exciting, and also Carolina. I think just from a defensive standpoint, you might see some like defensive plays that are going to be really fun. So I'm excited for it. I actually think it's going to be a really entertaining series, and I'm excited to see what happens. But yeah, ultimately, I'm going to just choose the Cup champs because they won last year, and I think they're going to go for a two-peat this year. And they look really good. Not to take anything away from Carolina, I don't know if Carolina has enough to be able to beat Florida. But I could,
Well,
like I said, I could be very, very wrong.
they're pretty much the same core, like they were last year. Didn't really change much. And Brandon Montour leaving and bringing Seth Jones as the Brandon Montour replacement has worked out fantastically in their favor. Um, so basically, it's in based off how they've played for Florida, it's been equal in my opinion. He perfectly slotted into that role. Brad Marchand, fantastic. So I mean, yeah, I have to give it to Florida and 7. It's going to be a very close series like we saw in 2023, but will it end in a sweep this time? No, it's not.
I
This
don't
is
think
going
so.
to be a I'm gonna go with a 6 game series. I think Florida's gonna win 4-2 the series. It's gonna be very close, like we saw in 2023. It's gonna be tight knit in terms of goals scored. We're gonna see a true playoff matchup where it's very, very defensive, and
Yeah,
it's gonna come down to a goaltending battle between these two goalies. So,
I agree. I agree.
yeah,
I'll
I
say
think Florida
seven. I'll
wins
say
six
7 games
games.
for them, but yeah.
Okay, 6 games, Florida. You're 7,
Yeah.
and I have to give my flowers to Carolina. This is a team that has impressed me. Even though you look at their lineup, this is a team that shows that it doesn't matter about the names that you have on your roster. It's are these guys able to compete? Something that Toronto should take notes on. So,
Right.
anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We'd like to hear your predictions in the prediction in the comment section below. Who wins the series, Florida or Carolina? How many games does it take? Who's the MVP on both ends of the ice? If our predictions are not to your liking, you could also state that in the comment section below. Make sure to like this video, comment in the comment section below, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for watching.